told Fokin his open letter to the international financial circles. He urges them to reject Russia's claim to the property of the former USSR until that property is divided between the successor states. Kyrgyz President Askar Akayev announced a new government today and took its leadership. The Estonian Supreme Soviet has repealed the state of economic emergency there. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker will visit the city Chelyabinsk 70, which is the site of a nuclear waste processing facility. It is the first visit of a foreign leader of this level to this city. Russian Vice President Rutskoy has arrived in Ingushetia for a sad mission to participate in the funeral of the Lipetsk military unit commander. The State Statistical Commission reports that the death rate has overtaken the birth rate in Russia. No commentary. Today in Moldova, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker arrived. As it was announced at a press conference to journalists, the American side is interested in the issues of observance of human rights of national minorities by the Moldovan government, by economic reform, and the recognition of existing borders and other issues. James Baker received assurances from Moldovan President Snegur that the Moldovan government will govern itself exclusively by the documents and principles of the United Nations in both its domestic and foreign policy. Baker said that he sees no barriers to establishing official diplomatic relations. For the first time in Armenia, we are greeting such a high-level guest from the United States. Secretary of State James Baker discussed a series of issues with President Levon Ter-Petrosyan. We expect that the Secretary of State and the Armenian President will issue a statement to the press. The southern republics of the Commonwealth have become the object of special attention recently, and there is a special reason for this. The Secretary of State of the U.S., James Baker, will meet with the new Europeans, since these republics beyond the Ural Mountains were recently accepted into the European structure of security and cooperation. The Europeans say that it is necessary to enhance the place of these republics in the European framework so they don't slide toward Islamic fundamentalism. Iran is planning retaliatory steps. In Tehran, it was announced that Iran will attempt to bring these republics into the Islamic countries' economic security and cooperation organization. The Tehran Times said that a great battle is underway for influence in Central Asia. Tehran hopes to replace Russian specialists at Caspian Sea oil facilities with Iranian specialists and discuss the prospect for turning the Caspian Sea into an Islamic sea. They said that the transformation of the former Soviet republics into Muslim states is the new holy mission of Muslims. The U.S. is still relying on Turkey, which is a more moderate Muslim regime, which is also very influential in the region. But the officials in Washington heard without enthusiasm that Turkey intends to create an age of Turkey. The U.S. fears that it may overplay support for Ankara in its competition with Tehran. And one more thought is a nightmare to the Americans. This is confirmation that Iran is hoping to gain access to nuclear secrets through Soviet Central Asia. The Greek newspapers report that Ankara also has ambitions on obtaining nuclear weapons through the former Soviet republics. Turkey and Iran both deny this, but American politicians are still tormented by doubts. Information from the Transcaucasus today, early in the morning, from the Armenian villages. The city of Shusha came under fire. There is destruction there. The news agency Asai Rada reports that the Azerbaijani village of Malbelisi was seized by Armenian forces with many casualties. The road to Shusha is now open. Armenian sources report to the Interfax news agency They deny firing or capturing cities in Shusha region. Today in Tbilisi, in the Cabinet of Ministers building, there was a meeting of the Political and Consultative Council of the Provisional Government of Russia to attempt to peacefully solve the conflict in the Tskhinvali region. The goal is negotiation with the Ossetian side. On January 25th, and this is a fact, we took the initiative and began preliminary negotiations. At these negotiations, we agreed that the Ossetian side should determine the date for the beginning of official negotiations and to communicate this to us. We are waiting here and have not received any communications yet. Today in the Kremlin, there was a ceremony for the presentation of heads of foreign diplomatic missions to Russian President Yeltsin. 127 ambassadors took part in this ceremony in accordance with an old tradition. The ambassadors were presented in order of seniority and time in country. This was Yeltsin's second meeting with the diplomatic corps. The first was just over half a year ago. Going out into the world, Russia intends to conduct an honest, open, and moral policy, independent of ideological dictates. Our main priority is the interests of the Russian people, which values peace no less and perhaps even more than the rest of the world, considering the consequences of the Second World War. Like every people, the Russian people desires prosperity and stability and firm guarantees of the rights of citizens and people in accordance with international regulations. Today, perhaps for the first time in history, there is a real opportunity to move away from confrontation between East and West. The Cold War is over. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now gaining new friends and allies, but I want to assure you that Russia is not intent on erasing the positive things done by our predecessors. This relates, first of all, to the relations between Russia and the states of Eastern Europe and other states. A strong democratic Russia, and this is what our citizens want to see, will never become an empire again. To the contrary, our goal is to work together with other countries of the world in order to confirm in the world community the ideals of humanity, freedom, and democracy. A response was made by the senior ambassador in Moscow from Senegal, Pascal Antoine Sané. He wished the Russian president good luck and a happy future. The Russian Defense Minister, Foreign Minister Kozyrev arrived in Geneva today to participate in a human rights conference in the disarmament talks. The human rights movement is enjoying success in our country as well. The last Russian political prisoners were released recently and held a press conference today. There were only 5 or 6 participants in the press conference today who were recently released from the facility near Perm. They were all sentenced to long terms under Article 64, betrayal of the motherland. Viktor Makarov served 4.5 years of a 10-year sentence. Boris Yuzhin voluntarily worked with the FBI and was accused of betraying his KGB employers in the U.S. Vladimir Putashov criticized the KGB's disarmament policy during the reign of Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko. Alexander Dolzhikov deserted the army, crossed over the border into China, worked there, and then returned, where he was sentenced sentenced to 12 years, of which he served 9. Igor Fedotkin was convicted of attempting to hijack a civil airliner. The participants talked about the horrifying conditions in prison and called for a thorough review of all legislation governing people in prison. Answering the questions of the reporters, Valery Smirnov, who was released some time earlier, said that in some former Soviet republics, including Georgia and Tajikistan, there still are political prisoners. The world at this hour, a survey of international news. Today in Tokyo, there was an attack on the headquarters of the governing Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. Shots were fired by the terrorist into the building. He managed to enter the building and get all the way to the office of the party president and Prime Minister Miyazawa. At this moment, he was arrested by police. He is a representative of one of the rightist extreme groups. He carried a document listing demands for the government to resign. The second UN observer group has arrived in Yugoslavia. They will visit Serbia and Croatia in order to consider the possibility of placing UN peacekeeping forces there. This process is being held up by one of the autonomous regions of Serbia, whose parliament calls for a referendum on the issue.